So I'm here today to answer one of my most asked questions on my booktube channel, and that is, why do I read these dark, messed up, and uncomfortable books? If you follow my channel for a while, you know that I've been known for reading the dark and stabby, reading the dark books, and so forth. And it's something that I've been hesitant to answer in long form on my channel, but I think I'm finally ready to do that. I get a lot of flack online and in my personal life for reading such dark and despicable things. I definitely get some judgment, but also thankfully, at least online, I do also find some kindred spirits, those of you that also share my love of dark fiction. So here is my answer as to why I read dark things. Hopefully you'll find this interesting and perhaps relate to it as well. So the big question, why do I read dark? And the short answer that I've always given on my channel when I'm mentioning it in the past is that I want to feel something when I'm reading. In my opinion, the absolute worst sin of a book is to be forgettable. And so for me, if I read a book and it leaves no lasting impact on me, I think that is the worst thing a book can do. I would rather have a book that I absolutely hate, that I have a visceral reaction to, that makes me upset, that makes me angry with the characters. I would much prefer that over a book where I'm indifferent, where I don't care. And so going along with that, a lot of times I get that reaction from a book in a negative way, where I experience a book and it makes me feel uncomfortable, where it makes me feel yucky and gross and weird, but I'd rather feel that than nothing at all. I can be someone, especially because I do read so much, that I can get a little bit indifferent to what I'm reading and go through the motions of it. And I always get really stopped when I find a book that really leaves that impact on me. Certainly I feel other things too. Sometimes a book makes me feel sad or nostalgic or something like that. But I'll be honest, the most consistent emotion that really connects me to a book is that feeling of uncomfortability. And if you look on my channel, particularly for my dark reads and my favorite books of all time, you're going to notice a trend there. And the ones that really left an impact on me typically are ones that have really horrific, messed up scenes that I will never forget and live in my head rent-free and I can't stop thinking about. So that's a short reason, but obviously I have a whole video here, so there is a little bit more to it. The next reason I like to read dark is because it helped me to work through my past. Now, without giving too much information away on the internet, I'll just say that I've gone through my struggles. I've had things that have been very traumatic, things in my past that really have been just really shaped my life, let's say. And so because of that, I do seek out dark books, not necessarily even dark books that particularly reflect my past directly, but books that deal with dark subject matter because I find a familiarity there. I recognize those dark emotions. I recognize that dark side of humanity, and I want to explore it. I know for other readers who have perhaps traumatic pasts, they are very nervous around books that delve into similar topics, and so they're of course aware of content warnings. And so I do try on my channel whenever possible to give those warnings, but I'm not actually the best at giving them, and that's simply because I am someone who actually finds it very therapeutic to work through those dark things by actually delving into them and kind of ripping open those wounds. And I find it to be, again, very healing. But I also, again, recognize that not everyone is that way. So I do try to give content warnings. I just tend to forget because it's hard for me to recognize content that might be triggering if it's not necessarily triggering for me. So I do my best, but it's definitely not perfect. And I've definitely had people in my comments say, oh my gosh, I can't believe you didn't mention that XYZ happened in this book. And I'm always like, oh, sorry, I forgot. And they're like, how did you forget that? And I was like, I know, I messed up. Let's talk about it. And then jumping off of that is the fact that I just like in general to explore the darkness of humanity. Something I say on my channel, which gets a lot of mixed results depending on my audience listening. But I do like to read books that represent different groups of people. I like diversity in my reading. And of course, that can mean something like diversity of sexual orientation or gender identity or racial or cultural backgrounds. But I mean that in every extent. And so what I mean by that is I just don't want to read books about happy people. I remember growing up, my mom gave me a copy of the book Pollyanna, and I could not stand it because that child is so happy and just has to find the positive in everything and just saw the world in these rose-colored glasses, and I couldn't relate to her. Instead, I definitely found myself seeking out books that actually, again, kind of played with the darkness, things like mysteries and things that had had some darker social commentary within them. And that's always been how I've read, and it continues to this day. I like books that talk about those things, and not, again, because I like those disgusting dark topics in and of themselves, but they do exist. And whether or not we write about them or whether or not we read about them, they exist within society. So I would rather that conversation happen. I think it's important for we as readers to have a language surrounding these difficult topics, because if someone does experience something, they need to have the words to seek help, to say, hey, this is going on, I need to talk about that. And that was definitely something for myself, is that as a child growing up, there were certain books that really helped me to find the words to say, hey, I need to speak up about what's happening. And I love the fact that I had those books available. I am deeply against censorship for that reason, because I feel that it is so important for people to find themselves in stories. And again, as parents, I get it. We don't want to expose our kids to the nasty side of the world, but we also, in a way, need to protect them by giving them the language to understand the darkness of the world so that they can speak up if something is happening to them. And so I think that it's just interesting to delve into these darker books because they tend to be a little bit more taboo. Even if they're mainstream, there's always someone giving you a side eye, and there's always someone who wants to just tuck away and brush away the dark parts of life. And often when I get those criticisms, I feel like it's coming from someone who perhaps has a very blessed life where they don't have those dark elements that have haunted their past. And for myself, those elements are real. I have seen some of them myself, and some I've seen in my friends and family as they have had their own struggles and demons along the way. And so I want to have that discussed. I want to have those conversations. I definitely agree that not everyone should have to read books that they're not comfortable with. Everyone should be allowed to draw their own line in the sand about what they want to read and what they don't want to read, and that is perfectly allowed. I will always respect that. I would never push someone in my audience to read a book they're not comfortable with. You are allowed to have your limits, again, your triggers, or just simply saying, I don't want to read that, that's disgusting, perfectly fine. But I also say, don't yuck my yum, and I'm doing this video because I want to explain to my audience, a lot of you who don't perhaps share my love of dark fiction, why I read it, and why we should not judge people who do read these kind of things, because I definitely think that there's still some stigma online, and I do really feel like I'm putting myself out there to publicly admit on a video channel to say, hey, I read these things, because I definitely 100% get comments saying, what is wrong with you? You are disgusting. And I kind of think it's funny, but it's also a reason that I want to talk about this more. And the last reason I tend to read dark things these days is because I feel safe, which might seem a little bit counterintuitive. But as I've talked about in previous videos, a lot of people assume because I read horror now that I must have been reading it since I was a young child. That was not the case. I grew up very anxious. I had fear and uncertainty in my family and home life. And because of that, I read pretty nice things. Again, I definitely dabbled into things like mysteries and all of that, but I was never looking to be scared or traumatized by my fiction at a young age, and I think that was because I got enough of it in my real life. Now, I know I've read articles, but of course I can't find them as I record them here, that talk about the fact that genres like horror, when it comes to movies and books and other kind of media, tend to explode or go into more mainstream culture in places that are more safe around the world. So places that have lower crime rates, places where people are a little bit safer, have more access to food and different security features, are more likely to delve into these topics. Understandably, if you're in a place that is war-torn, if war and violence is your commonplace, if that is your real life, I completely understand why someone would not want to go and watch a slasher movie in their free time. So movies like that don't tend to do well in countries that are struggling. And instead, they tend to do well in very cushy neighborhoods where someone, again, is perhaps middle class or has a lot of comforts in their life and are looking kind of to be thrilled and excited in their otherwise very safe or simple life. And so I do think that that is something I feel very lucky about as an adult, is that I've actually come to love horror as an adult in a way that I don't think I could have loved as a kid. I was a scaredy cat, and it was because I didn't feel safe. I didn't feel secure in my life, and so no wonder I didn't feel drawn to those kind of books. I didn't want to touch Goosebumps. Life was scary enough as it is. But now I give credit to my husband, my home, my life, that I feel very secure at night. I no longer have nightmares on a regular basis. And that is a point in my life when I started reading these dark things, because again, it felt escapist instead of reflecting on my current life. And so I think it's very interesting to see how horror is both a way to deal with my trauma and then also something that I'm able to explore because I'm past some of that trauma. So I think it's kind of a dual-edged sword there. So from there, I just wanted to talk a little bit more about my thoughts on censorship and where I draw the line as a reader and reviewer. So from my opinion, I really don't believe in censorship as an idea. Honestly, I know it sounds crazy, but I do believe that everyone should be allowed to write and publish what they like, and then it is up to readers to self-select whether or not they want to consume that. Obviously, when it comes to kids, I do believe in age appropriateness, but even with my own son, I do lean more towards the idea of having conversations with him when something is perhaps out of his wheelhouse, rather than simply banning him from reading something. Because we all know, we were those kids. We would totally sneak things that our parents said we couldn't check out and we would just read them on the sly. I'd rather have those conversations up front. But as adults, I fully believe people are allowed to self-select. And again, as I said before in this video, you're also allowed to select out. You're allowed to opt out and say, this is not for me. That is perfectly okay. But just because something is not for you, I don't believe that we as readers should be dictating the morals of other readers, deciding that something is inappropriate. As soon as you start to censor and ban things, you really take away that conversation. You take away individuals' language to discuss things that are happening, because again, whether or not you censor the books, the reality that that fiction is reflecting is still happening to individuals, and I want those individuals to have themselves seen, to be able to have a voice and learn how to speak about the things that are going on. I think that is so important, and I will stand on the rooftop and yell out that message. I feel very strongly about that. As for myself, sure, I have lines. I'll admit that since I've become a parent, I don't love books involving harm to children the way that I did before. Don't get me wrong, I still read a lot of them, but certain ones do push buttons in a way that I don't like, and it's uncomfortable in a bad way. So certainly there are things that I say no thank you to. Certainly when it comes to some true crime books that are fictionalized, that kind of glorify violent events, I definitely rethink them. For me, I try to avoid books that are just going to do uncomfortable subject matter for the sake of shock value. Certainly, I still read some of those. I'm open to trying different things. But for me, the books that I think do it best when it comes to these topics are those that explore it in more of a complex and nuanced way, where they're actually going and looking at the themes and hopefully exploring things in a way that we haven't seen before, opening the eyes of readers who, again, perhaps aren't exposed to this dark subject matter, and giving them second thoughts and making them question some of their stereotypes and pre-held beliefs about these situations. And I love a book that makes me think. I love a book that's smart and can play around with the darkness, but do it in a way that is very intentional. And that's, to me, what it's all about, is if an author is being intentional with those moments, I do not mind. Sometimes you need to build a dark and brutal world, like in A Song of Ice and Fire, and I don't mind it there. Not for everyone, but I think it has its place when a book is just writing something to shock the reader, to get an exciting review on a review site. I'm a little bit more skeptical, but to each his own, and obviously all I can do is just rate and review the books from my perspective as a reviewer. So that's it for this video here, but I'd love for you to extend this conversation into the comments. If you also read and love dark things, I'd love to hear from you. Why do you do that? And if you don't, hopefully you stick around. I appreciate you listening to the end, and I'd love to hear your perspective. What do you think? Did what I say make sense to you? And hopefully we can still be friends even if you hate dark and creepy stuff. If you're new to my channel, I do read a lot of horror, thriller, science fiction, and fantasy, and if you want to give me a thumbs up for this video, I appreciate the support. Also appreciate if you want to drop a comment, even if it's just a little emoji. Find something uncomfortable or disturbing or dark. I look forward to your creativity down below. If you want to hit that little notification bell, you'll never miss a video from me. Otherwise, I'll talk to you again soon. Okay, bye-bye.